Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Showrunner Whisperer. This is your podcast dedicated to going inside the mind of television Hollywood showrunners and how it is to write television and run television in today's television medium. I am your host, Andy B, as always. And first of all, if anyone who's new, hello, I'm Andy. Nice to meet you. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. Happy to have all y'all with me. So, first of all, happy June. We're in June. Oh my God, like we're almost halfway done with this year. It's insane, y'all. As always, I want to start by thanking everyone who showed some major love and support for the last episode, which was with Jake Wyatt, who is the showrunner of My Adventure with Superman, which is not right now airing on Adult Swim on Saturdays for its second season. So check it out if you're a big Superman fan or a DC Universe fan, or just a fan of good television in general. And we had a great time. We had a good response to the interview, and I'm glad so many of you enjoyed it. And as we're now entering June, we're gonna be going back a little bit with part two now of the Chad and James interview and the showrunners of Gotham Knights. As you remember, before we released the Jake interview, we released part one of our conversation with James and Chad as they talked about developing Gotham Knights and some of the things that they were trying to make happen on the show and so much more. And because, like I said on that episode, because we spoke for 2 hours, I felt it was better to just split up the interview into two episodes. So that way, kind of just because I'm trying to make sure that the podcast can be a little consistent and have just 1 hour per episode. And some things, these interviews they go longer, and I have no problem with it. I love talking to all these talented people, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to spread out the content and just divide up fairly. So but throughout this episode, throughout this part of the interview, we talk a little more about the plans they had, the things they were doing through Gotham Knights, as well as challenges that came to them in some of their previous jobs. We go down the One Tree Hill path a little bit, which there's they get very personal, and which I think is very powerful because they have some really important things to say about what they went through on that show. For people who watch One Tree Hill and follow kind of the behind the scenes of it all, I think you have an idea of what I'm referring to. But the thing is, I'm gonna let them tell their story and so much more what they have coming up now, hopefully very soon in the future. So I'm gonna stop talking and let you all enjoy part two, and I will see you at the very end. So with that said, cue the music. Oh, definitely. And you guys have, because you guys worked on Gotham and Krypton, where like these are two shows that have end destination that we all know. We all know that Bruce becomes Batman and Krypton blows the hell up, but you still find way. You guys have juggle these challenges of creating characters, creating stories where we all get hooked to the point where like, well, shit, I don't want Krypton to blow up now. Like, do we really need Superman when we can have Segel? Or like, do we want Oswald to really turn evil when he is so full of love?
Yeah.
So it's like like in the work, it shows through Gotham Knights, especially that when you get to the episode 13 and now he's Two-Face, it's kind of like, oh shit, like like the makeup is great, but it's like I don't want him to lose, because he now just discovered he has a daughter. So
I mean,
that was very much designed as like, okay, now season 2 would explore her trying to redeem him, bring him back. I mean, the moment that I just think that Misha and Olivia just nailed was the promise me. Bring me back.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we obviously knew season 2 was going to be was if it was going to happen, we were going to get there by the skin of our teeth. But it did feel like one of those things that, well, that's where you see where this would have gone. And with that ending, we very much knew we didn't want to cheat the audience by just ending purely on a cliffhanger. We were trying to create situations where it felt like almost an ellipse, like, hey, you know where this is going to go. So even if we don't get to tell that story. So I'd like to believe that the audience does understand that Duella would fight to kind of save Harvey's soul. And that there would be redemption down the line.
Well, I've always been curious about like how you two, like, if I had to pick up your issue 1 of your origin story of how you two became a rhyme duo, like can you take me back to like how this dynamic came to life before you guys became showrunners together?
It's not as good as the Harvey origin story. I'll just tell you that.
Let's ask said more common.
We did, but okay. I mean, this is what's interesting. So we met in film school at Columbia, New York, and we just instantly kind of gravitated towards each other because we had they make you go around the room your first day or your first, I think during orientation, you have to say what your big influences are. And a lot of people, I think, were trying to impress everyone else by going with some sort of more obscure, artsy, Renoir, Lars von Trier, and we were
nothing wrong with those guys.
Which is not.
Nothing wrong.
I then later went to those people's apartments and did not see Dogma films on their shelves. So
there's no Breaking the Waves poster, which I love, by the way. But on.
But we were like, I'd said like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Chad said Jaws, and it was like it was like the lights dimmed.
Yeah, we kind of saw each other
heart wipe
from across and we were like, okay, kindred spirits.
And then
it was like your version of the nod of like, oh, I see you.
Yes, and I am seen.
And then we ended up writing a script that we sold while in film school, so instantly becoming probably the most hated people in our class. But we got to leave and go pursue a career. But what's interesting, we weren't terribly interested in like at the time, and this is a long time ago, there really wasn't a TV. TV was not considered in art form enough that was worthy of the film school, and they didn't really have classes that taught it. No. So we were not
like none at all.
I took a TV writing class, but it was taught by I'm not kidding, an 80-year-old man who had done like Playhouse 90.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, and so it was all designed as like we were basically writing features that could be shot for television.
Yeah.
It was not. It was kind of a TV class in name only.
I took a like a comedy sketch writing class with like an SNL type thing, but again there was like no. Like Columbia didn't have it's not like they not like they were a feeder to SNL or Mad TV or anything. It just was kind of so effectively no TV.
But I feel like my real education for television, though, television writing, even though I didn't realize at the time, was just staying up late and watching things that I probably shouldn't have, or even things like the original V miniseries had a huge impact on me. But then things like I would watch, and it's weird because I'm so young, I don't know how I even understood what was going on. I would love to watch LA Law, and I know
what you're going to talk about.
Probably one of the biggest impacts of as being a viewer, but that is translated into what my ambitions are for television I'm making is the famous elevator sequence with Dinah Muldaur. That ending was so shocking, and I remember seeing it live. And it's literally the end of the. Do you know this?
I think LA Law.
No, you'd be forgiven.
It's before your time. But essentially, it was just this regular law show, and it was David E. Kelley, so it was always very kind of quirky and interesting, and sort of balancing humor with sort of things, and it has
with great character moments popped in there where you're just like leaning in the whole time.
And it ends an episode. There's this very prickly character played by Dinah Muldaur. And at the end of the episode, she's talking to another character, and the doors open. She steps in, and there's no elevator, and so she plunges to her death. And it was such a shocking moment that it just seared itself into my brain. As far as I want to generate that kind of reaction, And so that has always been, that is the benchmark or whatever for me as far as what, and I have not succeeded, I don't think, but of trying to deliver that kind of moment of just pure shock. And so I think that I consider my actual education. But yeah, no, the feature we sold did not get made, but the company that bought it and was going to produce it had a TV project. And so they were like, oh, would you be interested in doing this pilot? And we were like, yes. And so we wrote this thing, we pitched it, they bought it in the room, and then we wrote it, they greenlit the first draft. And so our reaction was, wow, this TV shit's so easy.
Like, what are we doing? What features this TV? Like, we got this, man.
We didn't realize. So we're patting ourselves on our back, thinking like we're like the greatest writers.
Wait for it, Andy. Wait for it. It's coming.
We didn't realize. So it was for MTV, and they hadn't done scripted, and so they did not actually give us notes until 2 weeks before production, and the notes were pretty extensive. And unfortunately, their notes, and we did, because we didn't know any better, we did them, all of them, every insane note, and so the thing ended up being truly terrible. But we did our lead was this young lady out of Toronto who had never done anything before. So her first job was Rachel McAdams. So
look at that.
Yeah. But and the second lead, Malin Ackerman, who also had not done.
It's a great cast. So, but so we ended up just weirdly doing pilots. Like you sort of, it was one of the things you got off that. We got another pilot. Actually, before that one had been shot and was terrible, we'd already gotten a couple other pilot deals. Yeah. And so we just every year would be constantly doing these pilots, and you get close. And so there was one that we were asked to start staffing people because in anticipation of a series pickup. And so we're meeting with writers, and they're asking us, well, how do you run the room? And we're having to answer, we don't know. How should we run the room?
We'd never been in a writer's room. We'd never been like staffed on a show. We kind of, I mean, the thing about, breaking in and becoming a writer, the good news is there's no set way to do it, but the bad news is there's no set way to do it. So we kind of just, we did it, we're doing pilots, and, we really, wanted to get into a writer's room.
Well, there is value. And so we did, I remember very distinctly after we'd done a bunch of pilots, and we had, at that point, we're like, well, actually, this is sort of good that, and so the one that we were our staff, like the last second, ended up not happening. But we kind of realized that, well, that was maybe a good thing, because we don't know what we don't know. And so we've
a blessing in disguise.
I'm sorry?
A blessing in disguise, basically.
Yes, no, exactly. So we told our agents, we were like, we just want to be on staff of something. And so that's where we started. We ended up joining the staff of One Tree Hill, and then ended up working our way up through the ranks. And I think in the end sort of that was that it did give us, as you work your way up the ladder, it provides you with the skill sets of what to do, most importantly, what not to do. You've seen, having produced now 400 maybe episodes of television, when you do get that chance to sit in the captain's chair, you're bringing with it a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge.
Yeah.
You develop this sense of what will work, what won't work. The trick is making sure that you're not limiting yourself based on what failed in the past, that you're still trying to push yourself. But it does allow you, it gives you this head start, as far as I know that now there's been a little bit of a trend with some people who, because they were a feature or a play or something, I can't imagine being thrust into having to try and run the first, pilot I ever, show that ever went. I think it'd probably be in some ways a recipe for disaster.
I can absolutely tell you it would be an absolute.
You just learn things, and again, and some people have done it remarkably well, but I do think that the learning curve is pretty high, and it's not to say that people can't just sort of be pushed into the deep end of the pool and swim, but I think it is easier when you've had a chance to be mentored. We've gotten a chance to be mentored by some truly incredible writers. We've come up through the Julie Platt camp on Vampire Diaries, and that's how we met Carolyn Dries. And being able to watch and learn from them. And the best thing about working for Julie Plec is that she does treat the writers as you produce your episodes.
Yeah.
And so even and we were about mid-level at that point, but even from the staff writers on up, you go to the sound spotting, you go to VFX spotting.
You're in the editing bay. You're in the
every little step. Like what I loved about it being on shows with her is where then you have a staff, a totally green staff writer who will come to you and say, they're like, okay, so I have sound spotting. What happens in this meeting? And you're like, okay, it's really simple. This is what you do, blah, 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 take you through. But it means that and I think that's why Julie Plec, if you look at the staff of Vampire Diaries, certainly the late staff, there's a lot of turnover early, but across the board, if you look at Vampire Diaries and the originals, you will see almost every one of those people are now running their own shows.
Yeah.
And that's that knowledge that she has been able to impart by simply making you a part of the process and letting, being in the editing room. And it's amazing to me that you will have situations now where people will be promoted to showrunner who haven't actually been on set or been in the writers, been in the editing bay.
Yeah.
And not that, look, everyone should sort of jump at those opportunities. And if the studio feels confident that person, that's great. But it is, you do learn a lot by working your way up in a way that I don't think you quite learn simply by being someone who wrote a really great script.
Well, especially looking back at it and knowing like the level of, knowing what that earlier version of me didn't know. I think it's a good thing that we, did the way we did it, because I think that now we know, and I mean, especially, you learn something. I learn new things all the time about, we were talking about the Two-Face makeup and the light and everything. I'm like, okay, that's good to know. That was,
didn't know that yellow light takes away red.
Yeah.
I didn't know either, because now I look at the picture, like, what, there is still red. There is no red there.
Yeah.
And I think that is where you find yourself, because you're constantly haunted by, like, we had one pilot where that it was this completely go project, and there were two plate networks fighting over it, and our gut sort of had told us go with the other network, but we went with the hotter, sexier network. And just before we turned the script in, the president of that network was fired, and kind of all the stuff that was thrown out. And it's one of those things where I look back, it's like, I wish I'd trusted my gut that we'd gone with the other one, because I think it would have been on the air. But at the same time, as to your point about blessing in disguise, I imagine that show might have been a total disaster, because we were not prepared for how difficult a production that would have been.
Yeah.
The personalities that were involved with that show. I think we may have been, there's an alternate timeline where that show went, but we left the industry, and I'm now working on a farm in Maine.
Yeah.
So it's like, thank God for sort of the unanswered prayer.
Okay, this is a bullet, and I want you to
we dodged, see? But at the time, I remember being devastated that it was like, And so I think that's where the spirit of making sure, and that was part of the strike, was really trying to make sure people understood the importance of involving these writers at every stage, because we can look at a script and that, okay, you're told this is $200,000 over and a day and a half over schedule based on the line producer's budget and the schedule that the ADs have made. And we can look at that and quickly see, okay, how in a very short amount of time, what stuff we can take out without hurting the story.
If we move this scene to this location, can it fit on this day instead of that other day that you've got to pay? Stuff like that. And
those are muscles that it's just the fact, it's not that we're geniuses or there's anything special. Everyone can learn this, but it's like spending time in the gym. You develop those skills by working out every day and being, going episode
metaphorically. We haven't. Neither of us have worked out, and I don't know about you.
Same here. No,
Sorry.
But those are those are just muscles that you develop.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that over time, and that's why I think I'm happy. What's interesting is post-strike, there's been a lot of the studios have been really asking for people that are experienced showrunners, are really wanting people that they previously in the streaming cable world, broadcast experience was not deemed that sexy. And now they're recognizing the value of people that have made 22 episodes a season.
Yeah.
Those skill sets are incredibly valuable.
Not to say that we haven't been like, oh, we're on episode 16, we're so tired. It's like, no, I mean, we may have done a little bitching along the way, but I mean, there is something to.
No, that's fine. I mean, you know, listen, I mean,
Yeah.
any job comes with its, with its challenges and so,
yeah.
you know, it's, you know, it's as long as you know it doesn't go out on other people, you know, because that was one of this might be very personal, but you know, because you guys were you're talking about safe spaces and you know how it's important to have showrunners that you know help you grow and help you feel safe. You know, you mentioned One Tree Hill. It was not a show I grew up with, but it was a show I grew up hearing a lot about.
Oh yeah,
on good and good fronts. How did you deal with with what is out there? You know, again, if you don't want to answer.
Oh no,
James gave an interview to Variety.
It's what's funny about that. All of that stuff is at the time we were talking about it, and that what's so maddening is that it took so long. And I think that Mark Schwann is a case of somebody who he was a feature writer. He was filled with a tremendous amount of bitterness over the way he felt he'd been treated or the way he had been treated. And it's one of those things where you can either learn from those lessons and make sure that you are not creating that environment, or you can recreate it.
You can break the cycle, or you can perpetuate,
and he very much chose to perpetuate it. And I think that's an interesting case of somebody who was given a tremendous amount. He was not experienced in TV at all, and he was given a tremendous amount of power, and very quickly used that to. I mean, like I feel like the most of the biggest monsters that I've worked with and for, I feel like are trying to use the mechanism of television or movies or whatever to fulfill this bottomless void of need, and they're going to subject everyone else to try and find the validation that they haven't found in their own personal life. It's all daddy didn't love them, and so they're going to now make everyone else pay. And I think in a case like that, it became very clear. So we were sort of there when the guardrails were being dismantled.
We were there seasons 2 and 3, and Mark Schwann was, to your guard. He was kind of testing his boundaries, because he was what Mark was trying to do was trying to selectively get rid of people who were those guardrails.
Like when we were on, it was still being run. It was sort of being run and kind of co-run with Mark. By Mark Perry. And so
wonderful,
and it was awesome. Writer, and there was also this amazing writer now, showrunner, Jennifer Cecil, who's incredible, and she was so protective of the staff. And so you didn't until they left, because they sort of understood what they were dealing with.
He also made it very uncomfortable.
But it was one of those things you really appreciated what the two of them did once you realized that they were gone. And it was also a case of where that was a situation where we didn't go to set. We weren't involved, which is weird. Now looking back, it's like, of course, but we weren't even involved in production meetings. You weren't in the editing room. And so it had the effect of, and I don't know if it was by design, but it very much had the effect of cordoning off what you knew about and what you sort of had a capacity to learn. So we actually, even though we found the writer's room itself to be just toxic and awful as far as the environment he was creating, we were not aware of the complete horror show that was happening on set, because
in Wilmington, North Carolina. And he would not, as James said, he didn't want anybody there. He didn't want us. He didn't even want us. We weren't in meetings. We weren't in, the meetings were, on via phone. We were just not there. So we found out some of the more awful things that happen,
because you're not realizing the lesson that we've always taken away from that is that the worst thing that's happening is not necessarily the worst thing that you're seeing, in that the iceberg goes very deep. And I think that is far as in terms of that being our first real staffing experience, it was very much like learning the lessons of what we didn't want to do. And you try, and it was a bit of a different time in that you tried to have as much of a thick skin as you could, but like the writer's room was right next to Mark's office. And so we would pitch him stuff. The writers would pitch him stuff that he would love. And then we could literally within the hour hear him pitching it to the studio or network. And so you're really happy that, oh, they love it. And then he would in that same breath say that his staff wasn't giving him shit. We weren't doing we weren't any good, and we couldn't, he was doing it all. And it was one of those things where you were like, what? The room came up with that. You didn't come up with that.
Come on. You were in editing.
And so but again, that's where talk about blessings and disguises is by the end of the third season, we did not want to return. It was not an environment, but there's also a level of desperation. That was our first real staffing. What does it look like to not come back to that show? Is that going to hurt our career? But it ended up being the best thing for it because we were then available to work on Kyle XY with Julie Plec.
So
and from there,
that show is so good.
It was a good show.
That was my first Julie Plec show I grew up.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was her first show. What's funny is she was a development person. She was a writer. She's always been a writer, but that was like her first where she got to actually show that. And that was a case, and she was awesome. And it was run by Eric Tuchman, who is now one of the showrunners on Handmaid's Tale. And we just learned it was what was great was that seeing the terrible way to do it and the way that demoralized you. Like you never on One Tree Hill, it was as we said about creating a safe space, it was always the opposite. Like if a pitch didn't land, your face was kind of rubbed in just mercilessly by Mark. And if the pitch succeeded, you always knew Mark Schwann liked to pitch because he would say the same thing, which is, I was thinking the same thing.
Like that's when you like that was the if life had subtitles, like that was a good pitch, and it was that was the kind of thing. So I think that what happened to not what happened to Mark, what Mark rightly became of Mark's actions.
But it should not have taken that long.
Overdue.
And that is a case of where I think that when something is successful, it becomes harder, and people sort of there is a built-in kind of excuses kind of get made, and we were certainly vocal at the time. I think that what also didn't probably because we weren't aware of the stuff that's happening in Wilmington, it's one of those things where each person has a little small piece of their own sort of piece of the puzzle there. Yeah. And I think, and I would hope now today that it would be an environment which we would all sort of know each, like you'd be able to collectively see the bigger picture. Yeah. But he was just an asshole. I mean, I mean, obviously that wasn't his biggest, the worst of his crimes, but it is somebody who I think very much was creating the infrastructure of the show and using the power that a showrunner has. Mm-hmm. He literally wrote himself into an episode to mentor the character played by the actress he was sexually harassing. I mean, in terms of I don't think you can get more sort of textbook as far as abusing the power that you've been given. You creating.
I didn't know that. My big sister, she grew up on the show, but again, this was a time when social media wasn't as big. So sure. She would never have known that. Oh, the guy who's a showrunner who's on the show now playing this character to this female character who is actually harassing in real life. We would have known about it. So, but that's wow. But
it's also tough at the same point. Like I'd had because, and I'll just very sort of cop to the fact that our experiences on that show very much left a sort of bad feelings. Like I didn't leave that show feeling happy. I remember feeling like, well, if this doesn't work out, I'd rather go to law school than go back to that show. Yeah. At the same time, so it's the interesting thing of interacting with fans and interacting. Like I'd had my sister-in-law, who's a teacher, sent me a text saying, "Oh, the valedictorian in our school just quoted in her valedictorian speech a line from One Tree Hill," and I was like, I very much sort of laughed, writing back saying like, "What?" I wanted to know what the line was because I was going to make fun of it, and thought it was just so crazy. And she sent me the line, and I was like, oh my God, that was from our last episode of One Tree Hill that we wrote
that.
And it was the whiplash of, the nice thing is I think that meeting with fans where the show did mean a lot to them is it's made some of those bad feelings feel a little bit less bad, that realizing some of the stories that they were actually impactful, even if they may have been the result of a monstrous showrunner, that people's lives were affected and touched. And I think that, I don't want to say it makes it worth it, because I don't think anything makes it worth it. There's a little bit of redemption there.
But it's good that something that out of a bad situation, kind of behind the scenes for a lot of people. And as James, just to reiterate what James says, what we experienced does not hold a candle to what was going on in Wilmington and what some of those people were having to deal with. But to the we were talking earlier about you can't work from a place of fear. The reason we know that firsthand is because we did it. We did it for
that phrase is that Chad mentioned earlier. That came out of the One Tree Hill experience.
Yeah, and I mean that was so that when it came time to even before running our own show, but especially when we, when it was an environment that was wholly, our putting together, we just knew that with like hell or high water, whether my career ends fucking today or whatever, people that work for me and with me are not going to work out of a place of fear, though the heavens fucking fall. Like it's just because I remember how we were on that show. And I remember, it just was, and how others were, and how it was just like, that was just, that's not how you do it. And,
and I think that is an example also of a show that's sort of running and just kind of becomes like sort of repeating storylines or anything. It's because he is not welcoming enough to create. The show, I think, succeeded the best when we were all able to contribute to it and contribute different sort of perspectives and things. And that's, I think, when the show worked best. When it worked, when it didn't work very well was when it was all just sort of being filtered through this very bitter, angry person. And I don't think that's I think from he himself, like, is not able to access, I think, some of those human emotions of understanding, if the show behind the scenes, if the show was sort of shining a light behind the scenes, what were happening, like, I think people they would not have found it this sort of soulful, touching experience. And I think that's something that it was a very unpleasant experience. But I do think as a result of that, as Chad says, is we've sort of used that as the thing we want to avoid. And that we want to, and you also create an environment where people feel like if something's happening that you're not aware of, that they say something, and that and that they feel comfortable doing that, and feel comfortable, we just don't want people suffering in silence.
No.
And so we've always kind of said that to people. We're like, if there's something that's happening, or if there's something we've done, say something to somebody else. If you're, don't feel permission to take big sort of creative swings, and to really embrace the fact that we're all trying to make something special.
Yeah. And one thing James and I also will not do is, if somebody pitches a really good idea, we won't say, we were thinking the same thing. It's like, nope, you get the credit for that because it's yours. Anyway, we stop talking about March 1, please.
I'm sorry.
No, because you asked a very simple question, and then I realized I think we owe you.
We'll send you our therapy.
We owe you for a therapy session.
Listen, I'm happy that you guys. First of all, I appreciate you guys that you were willing to talk about it, because again, I don't know if any of this could have triggered you. So again, but the fact that you guys have come out on the other way so strongly and not become like him, is and I can tell you this right now, like, I don't want anything to do with that man. So I'm not giving a platform on my show. So thank you guys for sharing those.
No, I was just gonna say what's sort of fascinating though is when you look, it very much sort of the showrunner's DNA gets interwoven into the shows. What's funny is watching, or not funny rather, but sort of horrifying, is you go back and watch some of his work and you can sort of see all of it in a way that I think is sort of just sort of fucked up and fascinating, is that it's like, it was oozing through. And I think that that's where it is important to just to make sure, as we're trying to make something that's lasting, we're trying to make something that's impactful. It's also important to make something that doesn't scar somebody for the rest of their lives, or even for a few years, and to really, it's none of it's worth it. None of it's, people getting hurt on set. There's no shot that's worth somebody's life. There's no, storyline that is worth sending people to a terrible place. And I think that's just something that everyone in this industry kind of needs to aspire to.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing, party people? Let me whisper in your ear. Tell you a little something you might like to hear. What's going on, brothers and sisters? It's your man, Brother Nate from the Lituation Room, as well as the Kings of Sport podcast. And I'm here to tell you about the Multiverse of Color. See, the Showrunner Whisperer is brought to you exclusively by Multiverse of Color. Now, Multiverse of Color is your home for fresh takes on the world of pop culture by established journalists and emerging content creators. It's your one-stop destination for a vast array of articles, as well as audio and video productions. Multiverse of Color features exclusive interviews, media event coverage, and film analysis. We talking about all films, all movies out here on these streets, from Hollywood's biggest blockbusters to the most intimate of independent projects. So visit multiverseofcolor.com today. Yes, today, right now, for all of the latest stories, and follow Multiverse of Color through the social media links provided in the description below. And now, back to the Showrunner Whisperer.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, like now in for example, in in the Me Too era, because, because, you guys came into a franchise that, like in the midst of it, had, you guys came, I think you guys came like a little bit right after the whole thing with the showrunner of the Flash and Supergirl, but like, it was in in a DNA in the age that we're living now, where social, like now people can go to social media and voice their stories, or they can go to something like a Variety or a Deadline and talk about, this is what I was put through. But again, back when One Tree Hill was happening, I'm guessing it was just not the same way, because like I don't even know if Twitter existed when
no,
One Tree Hill was there.
It's in MySpace did, but that's how old it was. No, and I think the thing that we need to survive, I think the terrible pattern that sort of has emerged is where problems don't get solved until you put it on social media. And I think that we need to not to say that things that I think that the systems need to be put in place where that's not somebody's avenue of where they have to worry about whether, if I say something, will I never work again. But that internally, that the studios, and I think that the executives have really tried to be responsive to these things, about understanding that letting the process, you have to create a situation where we are being responsive, not the public forcing us to be responsive.
Well, that was so courageous about Audrey's, going on social media with
the One Tree Hill writer
that really kind of made at least some of it known. And my hat's off to because that took a lot of guts,
which even is sort of acknowledged, like it was like how fearful that was, and and that was sort of the prickling of the veil of that, all the things that each one of us sort of knew but didn't, and she was many years after us. But when I started reading her thread, because she didn't name the show, she didn't name him, and I instantly just that kind of hairs in the back of my neck sort of stood up and was like, that sounds like Mark Schwann. And then you immediately,
run to the IMDb,
and like saw that she worked on One Tree Hill and instantly knew that that's what she was describing. And so I think that's, it's one of those things where it's like, she should not have, obviously huge props to her for doing that, but this is something that the studio should have been on top of, and not force this writer to be in a situation of not knowing what the end result of that's going to be, not having to say, I'm going to risk my career to let people know something that's happening. And so I think that those kind of acts need to be supported, and people need to be free to sort of voice those things. So it doesn't have to become a risky proposition of where you're publicly having to
risk your career.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I'm glad that these are lessons that, that you guys are not applying. These are lessons you're not applying. You're applying to now your work as showrunners. Whether it's through Gotham Knights, and future things that you guys will do, because this could have been easily led to you guys will stop writing, go into other careers, but you stuck through it, and that in itself is inspiration that I think a lot of people will be able to take away from this, because it's people who, even though I'm a journalist, I don't write the way guys you write. You guys create. I just write about the things you create, but that is such a passion that I'm that can so easily be taken away from someone like him.
And it's very, very easy. I mean, that's the thing, is even now, having done this for like 25 years, the insecurity that I think most artists and feel, or most writers feel, or whatever, I think there's never a part of you that we all have imposter syndrome. We all keep expecting someone to tap us on the shoulder and say you don't belong here, and how quickly it is, how quickly you can be set back to that place. And I think that for especially a not that experienced writer or a younger writer to be put in an environment like that is just devastating. And you can so easily convince yourself that you don't have talent, you don't have worth, that you're not contributing, and you're a complete failure. And it doesn't take that much. And so I think sometimes in this industry with some people that whether they're aware of it or not, and some of them are aware of it, they are aware of the power that they wield and effectively use that as a weapon. But it's one of those things of really wanting to nurture people and finding that, I think likewise, a positive comment and creating sort of, a positive experience with people, showrunners appreciating what you've brought to the show. Yeah. Has the exact same effect. And it's one of those things where I think that's where people, you can tell it requires so much confidence, I think, in your work and your voice, that I think that's one of the things that showrunners, I think, do need to have, is that ability to sort of look at people and give them that confidence that they need.
Definitely. Well, just moving away with more happier territories. It's, what are you guys working on right now? I don't know if you guys can announce anything, but what do you have guys in the works to get it right now?
Nothing we can really talk about at this point, but we're all just sort of, I think, like most people, sort of looking forward to the new year being sort of a new, fresh start. Yeah. And
only because everything is so kind of nascent, and it's like we've got something really great, we're just not going to, and it's all kind of,
that's also the reality. People don't realize is like the one thing you did, there's like 20 things that died, deaths along the way, sometimes painfully, sometimes not so painfully. But that's where it's like, I think most people, we have a bunch of irons in the fire, and look forward to, hopefully people seeing something soon, because that's what we miss.
And talking to you about it.
Yes.
I will, I love you guys, so I always happy to help promote whatever you guys are doing. I'm always hoping, because having watched Gotham, Krypton, and Batwoman, and Gotham Knights, I'm just thinking, like, man, I want to keep seeing these guys in the DC world, and I need to bully James Gunn somehow into getting you guys somehow. Is there something you would want to do in his world from all the things you've already now done? If you could take on your next DC challenge now as showrunners, or as film writers, do you know what that would be?
Don't know. We're huge James Gunn's fans, and
I mean, it's interesting. We did. I mean, the thing's, my favorite comic run of all time was Scott Snyder's Court of Owls run.
Yeah.
So I did at least get to obviously didn't get to adapt it as faithfully as I would probably would have loved to have done, but I do feel like I kind of got the thing that I love the most in the DC world. There's a couple other more obscure stuff that maybe one day we'll get a chance to do.
Yeah.
But
what do you define as obscure? Like what is obscure?
Like stuff that I don't think is quite as that has hasn't made quite as much of the impact as Batman's, the sort of big pieces, the stuff that if you were to maybe mention on the street, people would be like, what? So, which I don't quite want to mention just in case like something.
Okay, fair enough.
But they're smart. But I was very,
they're not going to give you Wonder Woman, man.
But that's okay. That's okay.
No, we said no.
But I do. I mean, we're still big fans of DC stuff, and would love to work with them again in the future. And it is. I think that they're trying to sort things out and figure out what the next steps are. That I wish them nothing but the best, and I think that it's right now such a challenging environment, and just really praying that they're able to pull it off,
and that they please keep making Harley Quinn.
Yes. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I'm sure that show is bound to go on for several more seasons. And maybe you guys will end up on Harley Quinn. You will write some. I wonder what's the most absurd thing you guys would do with her, because after seeing what you guys have done with these other Batman characters, I'm like, what would Chad and James do with Harley? Like, what would they do with?
You can't top what they're doing.
They're crushing.
It's so brilliant.
I just want to. I mean, I honestly, I wouldn't want to get in the way. I would just be like,
I know it's actually
you guys wouldn't get in the way. You guys,
it's nice though having things that you're the fan, just to purely be the fan of. And that you can just sort of enjoy and be inspired by, because that's the other thing is I think that when you sort of live and breathe so much for so long, it's so gratifying when something like Harley Quinn comes along that is just so out of the gate brilliant, that you're just completely in awe of what they've done.
They did. We should watch Harley Quinn.
I know. Now I want to go watch Harley Quinn.
Venture through. I only got into Harley Quinn like last year, so I'm still on season 1. So I'm.
There's
you're
a bastard.
It's so good that I actively was like, I'm not going to binge watch all of this like in one sitting.
That's right. I want
to extend this as much as I can.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah.
One of my last questions for you guys, and again, I know I could literally talk to you guys for hours, but one of the last things I want to ask you guys is, what is a misconception you guys think, whether it's viewers, it's critics, reporters, what is a misconception that you guys think they have about the work of a showrunner? That you guys, if you had to stop someone on the street and be like, I want to clarify something to you right now about what we do, what would that be?
It's a really good question.
I mean, my big thing is
James, take it.
That I do. I mean, I sort of answered a little bit before about how that everyone working on the show is not all in lockstep, and that that a lot of it is curating the different ideas, and that I think as far as a misconception with critics is I think it's probably different with critics. I wish people understood that many of the people that they're citing as responsible for the stuff, it's a much broad, and I understand you can't mention every little thing, but these shows are not largely auteur works, in that it's not all just coming from the mind of this one genius person, that it's many people behind the scenes doing incredible work. From the fans, I wish that they did understand that no one does any of this stuff if they hate the characters. We love the characters. We love, we would not, the amount of the physical toll that running a show takes on you. Like it's amazing. We haven't quite experienced this, but on our showrunner group chat, that people talking about having blood transfusions. I know for Gotham Knights, if we got 4 hours sleep a night, that was a good night. And the amount of work, I know we're still catching
up on sleep,
but the amount of work that goes into it can only be done if you're passionate about the material. and that you simply would not be doing any of this if you, and I think I'm probably voicing this mostly to the slightly more toxic fandom. And I'm not saying like, oh, you should cherish everything and you have to love everything, or you can't be critical, or you can't hate things. It was just more the supposition that somehow we would take on a project because we didn't like those characters.
Yeah.
And that I wish that they sort of understood how hard the showrunner, but also just everyone behind the scenes is working, and just the amount of, and the fact that there's certain things, and this is weird because on some hand, I also understand people shouldn't take into account is that the amount of math that's involved that doesn't necessarily have to do with telling the best story, but budgetary math, scheduling math, trying to fit all this stuff in, is that sometimes you can't, there are certain things that we just are just hamstrung by. That we would love to do, but at the same time,
41.5 minutes to
like you're trying to pull off these little puzzles, and you're assembling the parachute after you've jumped out the plane, and you're trying to make it all come together, and you're sitting there stitching it up as you're free falling, and then suddenly
the plane is actually coming down on top,
and then the producer says, oh, you can't use that much thread. And so you end up trying just to do the best you can with what time and money that you have allotted. But at the same time, I also feel like, well, that's not the viewer's problem. There's so much.
That's true.
That's not. I don't. That as much as I would love people to recognize that, well, we don't have. That there are episodes of some streaming shows that one episode costs more than in the entire season of Gotham Knights. Yeah. I also think that's not really their responsibility, I think
all I mean, if they've, especially with paying for streaming services or whatever, like they've all they have to do is show up and like it or don't like it. But I mean, I think with I mean, it's our job, and what we've tried to be very good at is with Gotham Knights, certainly we did not have, I mean, you never have as much money as you want to do the thing you want to do. But it's, you have to figure out how to do as, the best show that you can within those parameters. And,
and I would try and take away, as much as I do say, like, yes, you should just watch the stuff you like, is that I wish that people would understand, like, this concept of rooting for shows to fail, I think is one of the most detrimental. Like, it's one of those things where if you're cheering on something failing, you're telling the studio or the maker, whoever, that they're going to take less risks, not more. Yeah. And that if you're unhappy with the way something has been adapted, you don't have to watch it, you don't have to love it.
Well, that's the thing. You want the show to, then don't watch it.
Just don't watch it.
Yeah, hate watching it. I've never understood,
man.
Yeah, like that's that's something I remember, like during Batwoman, like because I was like, Batwoman, like, this is something something new and different. But people, like, because people see certain ways, even with Gotham, I remember, like, people would see, like, just the way some trailers were edited, and they were like, oh my god, this is like cringe, like, this is giving cheap or whatever. I don't, I'm just trying to talk about the Gen Z does, but like when you actually watch the show, like, I mean, like the story, like, we look at something like Ryan Wilder, a black woman's story being told in the world of Batman, and then, but you look at something like Gotham Knights, where you have, these misfits, who, like, yes, a lot of them come from very complicated families, and they could easily have just ended up being next generation villains, but instead now they're trying to take care of the streets and thinking of those who don't have voices. So, hate watching, I've never understood that as a concept.
I just, that is another, that we have no control over the marketing. And so, I mean, just to be truth be told, like that first Gotham Knights trailer, we were horrified.
We didn't know it was out until the world knew it was out.
But even like things like you certain ways that we edit stuff, like, we film different takes of stuff, and the fact that a take of something that's maybe broader than we would go with gets in there, you're like, but again, that's, it's one of those, that's just sort of the way it works. And that's always the trouble with new shows, is because the people, and they're smart people, they're dedicated people, they bring just as much passion to their job, but they don't always know what we're going for. Yeah. And so it is frustrating when a trailer comes out and you're like, oh God. But we have nothing, we have very little to do with it. And I think eventually what's interesting about with Gotham Knights, the sort of middle of the season to the end of the season, I thought the trailers they were cutting were
Oh
fantastic.
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Oh yeah. They got
We said
definitely.
we were
It's
just
like Stone One listed at CW because because like when I heard the show was happening, I'm like, oh, I love Chad and James and Natalie Abrams and and other people who came onto the show to work on it. I was like, yeah, in concept, this show sounds it's definitely questionable because we do have Batwoman. That's I know the whole world is still kind of like we lost Batwoman when we got Gotham Knights, but that's not that's not up to
Yeah,
you.
we had
That's
nothing to do.
that was
yeah,
us.
we didn't cancel Legends of Tomorrow. We love Legends of Tomorrow.
yeah.
This notion that
Yeah, and just I mean it's because we were all kind of a lot of the writing staffs were in the same building and we'd see the Legends people all the time, and it was just I was just like, okay, so what are you doing with Bebo next? I mean, I was no, and I think that I mean if I had my druthers, Legends Tomorrow and Batwoman would be in season, I don't know what season. They'd be still on the air.
And and that's the other thing with like we're friends with all the Superman Lois writers. Like we're like even actually one of the writers, Katie Aldrin, was our writer's assistant on Krypton.
I remember
that we're all just this big family, and this notion of that we're somehow in competition, or that we
we're rooting for. Speaking of rooting for things, it's like no, I long live the Arrowverse, man. I think that
or not understanding that certain shows are geared towards certain networks, as far as or assuming that just because a writer worked on this show that maybe it's not a show that you like, that actually isn't that's not all they're capable of. No, they're dealing with whatever pressures of that network. And that's what's sort of interesting that you see, especially with like the Julie Plex of the world, that you're seeing that, out of the originals, a CW show, then you have Barton Ashley created Yellow Jackets on Showtime. And that it's like, I think that every writer I know has a premium cable show in them, and that just because you are dealing with a network that you may not necessarily vibe with their sensibility means that that's all people are capable of. They're steering it towards that sensibility.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason, because when I was I think 22 or 23, that's when I first learned about, as a critic myself, learning about studio nodes and network nodes. And I'm like, what do you mean studio network node? Like, the writers that I was talking to, like, well, when, we can't just write a script and then just produce it. We have to run it by, our bosses. There's bosses over bosses. So yeah.
And at every point, you can, and you're not just doing it's not just reviewing the scripts. They're reviewing what we call the story errors. They're sort of like these synopsis or whatever, and they've always been very great. And we've never had an episode blow up or whatever. But they are generally, if the one little behind the scenes thing, if there is something where you're like, I cannot believe that they thought the audience was that stupid that they clarified something so painfully obvious, that probably was a studio note. Or a network note or whatever. And it's just them coming from a place of not wanting the audience to be confused.
Yeah.
And that's, certain networks may be more forgiving or less forgiving about things like that. But they're not the enemy. They're trying to react to these things as an audience.
No, in fact, I mean, the CW and Warner Brothers in DC, I mean, they were fierce advocates of the show. And honestly, just on a more ground level, just fans. I mean, that was what was so great is, I mean, you may hear from, showrunners about, are we all making the same show? And the answer is, hopefully yes. And in Gotham Knights, we all knew the show we were trying to make.
And the tough thing is they're approaching this as an audience, but they don't necessarily know what maybe something that's, I mean, we would constantly say, like, they'd be like, oh, we don't really like this thing. And you're like, no, it's actually from the comics. The fans are going to love it. They're going to expect it to be this way. And it's and sometimes, some of those times that they're sort of like, well, we don't care. Or other times they're like, no, this is awesome. Like, once you explain it that, oh, this is this thing that people love and expect, they generally are very appreciative, but their part of their job is to react to things, from their own sensibility. And that's where it is a juggling act of trying to get certain things through. And, certain, like, for example, like, we knew where the watches were on Gotham Knights, that the watches were the key to finding the court and that whole thing. We knew that was going to happen in episode 8. And The studio just weirdly, when we introduced the watches in episode 3, latched onto that. They just didn't like them.
The idea that the Court of Owls thing, they thought it was a little early to be saying that what it was.
Something. It was a weird fixation where it became this like slight little battle. And it was, at the time, we knew we needed this thing desperately, but we also knew that if we explained, if we explained the way, the hands are actually correspond to longitude and latitude, their brains would explode. So it was one of those things where we just had to, which is fair. I mean, they're handling all these different shows. They keep all the mythology, but we knew that if we explained why we needed the watches in that episode,
it was dead in the water.
It would be dead in the water.
But because it would have been again, we would have been talking about an episode that was 5 episodes down. And I mean, people only have so much, bandwidth. And what's great is that once we kind of got to that, they were like, now we get, and they loved it. And we're like, oh, we're so glad. And what that particular thing did was kind of build a level of trust that goes both ways. And they would have in our notes calls, it kind of became them. I know you guys probably have an answer for this, and if this is down the line, that's fine. And that was what Michael was so amazing. Formerly at the CW, was so good about about allowing for you to have a plan and not be like this is I'm not gonna wanting to hear you out, because he's a storyteller, he's a fan, he's really good at what he does, and that was and it not only did it we had an answer, but what it made us want to do, again with the level of trust, is you really want to have that good answer for him.
Yeah.
Just know it's going to be the good answer that the audience is going to love and everything. And it really was. It was a great creative experience with all of us on the show. It really was.
Yeah. So anyway, we're looking forward to whatever the next thing is, and wanting to make it as creatively fulfilling and
don't look at me when you say that. I don't know what creative is.
No, I know. You don't want to
see it for the money. No.
Yeah. You don't want to spill the beans in front of the journalists of like me trying to figure out what are they working on next?
To me, it's also a guarantee that then it dies some horrible death, and then someone's like, "Wait, they were supposed to be doing this thing."
Wait, they told Andy they were doing. Wait, what are you doing?
Yeah, and then
Star Wars. What?
Yeah.
Not it.
I don't want the Star Wars crowd. I do not want the Star Wars crowd. Imagine being like, so what did they tell you? I'm like, they told me nothing. So but
I will watch whatever the new Star Wars.
Yeah.
Be sure about that. I will be there.
There's usually a period where it sort of is like you don't want to wait, and that's why usually when stories break about stuff, you find out they've actually made the thing or the so
yeah.
I mean, it's only January. Yeah, it's only January 5th, so things I'm sure, like in 3 months from now, like something will be out. I'll be like, oh, that's what they were talking about. But gentlemen, you guys are a blast to talk to, and I thank you so much for coming on the show, talking about your experience as showrunner. And I hope that, again, I'm hoping that any guest I have on, that people will take something away from, like, oh, maybe I was a little too hard on them, or oh, now I get why some things would make them it. So again, people are not always going to agree with everything that happens on the show, but having more understanding of, like, hey, they're not throwing acid at Harvey Dent because they hate him. They're throwing acid at him because, like, this is the culmination of a long arc he's gone through, for example.
No, absolutely, and again, it's okay if they still are like, nope, those guys are idiots. I'm okay with that too. I think the work should always.
I think the World Runner can use a little more constructiveness than hate. I think there's enough hate for lifetimes to go on. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And we look forward to chatting again soon.
As usual, time flies talking to you.
And welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed it's the second part of my interview with Chad and James. It was very insightful. Again, I love those two guys. They are passionate, they're very talented, they're hard workers, and also they're just very genuine, which I love. And yeah, I hopefully will have them on in the future again for their next project. I'm definitely curious of what they're cooking, so to speak, as the kids say it. But yeah, that's gonna be a wrap for this episode. So as always, you can always find. We're gonna go through the plugs as always because we want you to keep us up. We want you to stay updated with us through social media. If you enjoy those sort of things, trust me, I know social media is not that fun these days anymore because of the world being the way it is. But if you're on social media and you're on these platforms, you can follow us first of all on Twitter at Showrunner Talk and at Multiverse Color. On Instagram and Threads, we are at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color, which again, these are the same handles for both Instagram and Threads. On Facebook, we are at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color on Facebook. So go and like us over there on both pages. And then finally on TikTok, we're on at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color. We're gonna also try to make sure to start using those pages a little bit more. It's because everyone uses specific social medias these days. They're not on all the platforms at the same time. So there's that. And as always, you can find all the latest episodes of Showrunner Whisperer at showrunnerwhisperer.com. If you have any, questions for me or about the podcast, or eventually when we start announcing when we're gonna have guests on the show, you can just email showrunnerwhisperer@gmail.com for your questions that we will maybe try and ask said showrunners. And for me, you can find me at Andy Behbakht on all social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Kick, where I stream video games and more. I'm also an entertainment journalist for Screen Rant, so I do a lot of interviews and news coverage over there. And of course, I am the editor-in-chief of Multiverse of Color. And when it comes to the Showrunner Whisperer, I have a little favor to ask because we're now 6 episodes in. Something I would really, really appreciate is if you guys could leave some 5-star reviews and some positive feedback on the Showrunner Whisperer's official Apple Podcasts store listing. So, because this is the thing, it's so simple. But by just leaving a 5-star review and giving some words about what you think about the podcast, what you enjoy about it, and even you can even include some things that you want us to improve on when it comes to the show. What that does for us is it elevates the Showrunner Whisperer more further up in Apple Podcasts so that more people can discover the show. Because the thing is, not everyone uses social media, which is perfectly fine. But the way people discover podcasts will be usually something through like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio or Podchaser or wherever you listen to your podcast at. All the links are, by the way, in the show notes. So you can, if you want to subscribe, click on any of the links in the show notes and it will take you there. And yeah, it just takes a couple minutes, to just leave a 5-star review and some brief words about what you think of the show so far. Because again, that's the best way to support the podcast. And that's the thing. I encourage you all, if you're a big, passionate listeners of podcasts and you want to support your host, the best way to do it is through those positive reviews. So again, here's the thing. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for any of that. This podcast is free. This is for your enjoyment. But if you feel like, how can I help? How can I help the Showrunner Whisperer? It is by leaving those 5-star reviews so that more people can kind of get an idea of what the podcast is, so that more people who are also interested in TV and film can discover it through where they listen to their podcasts at. And yeah, that's gonna be it. We will be back with a new episode on June 19th, Wednesday, June 19th. So look forward to that. We have we have still a lot of fun interviews coming up and interviews that are being recorded as we speak. So, and again, I appreciate all of you guys for showing the support, for being here, checking out the podcast, and enjoying these interviews with these showrunners and getting a better, hopefully getting a better understanding for what it's like to run a TV show in today's landscape that we live in. But as always, a huge shout out to all my team members, Brother Nate, Julian Bell, Mike Schmidt, for all their hard work on the show, for helping make the show be what it is. And so on behalf of Julian, Mike, and Nate, I'm Andy Behbakht, and I will see you next time on the Showrunner Whisperer.